what's being anticipated this afternoon. Thanks so much, Opeyemi, for joining us this afternoon. We finally got the budget being presented today, even if it is by proxy. Just taking a look at the current situation, I mean, there's many who are worried about the tension that's been generated here in the run-up to this announcement. Just how much of a concern is this for you?
Well, it is a concern. First of all, it raises questions about whether legislative processes are working, whether there's the needed integration that you need between the two chambers of parliament. But more importantly, for the substantive discussion about the budget, it raises questions how these two houses are going to agree on the budget figures if they couldn't even agree on the presentation venue and logistics. So we're likely, I fear, going to have a scenario in which each of the houses flexes muscles over which version. Typically, they pass two different versions, as is usual, and then they harmonize them. And I wonder how that process of harmonization will work in the face of what we've had recently.
In all probability, many are saying it would probably lead to more delays moving forward, putting big question marks around implementation moving forward. Your issues around implementation of that budget and how efficient implementation is said to be given our past experiences.
We had a recent discussion about that. At best, 40% execution of what was in last year's budget. I think those problems are going to remain. I think the fundamental questions about capacity in the public service, about the integrity of the figures that get into the budget in the first place, about the deficit that is always, there was a deficit in the budget last year, and there was no strategy that was resolved for financing that deficit. So in effect, what had to then happen is that some of the spending that was inserted in the budget clearly could not be executed if you didn't have a way of funding those spending. We might see a recurrence of that. And of course, there's the broader issue of governance and politics as we go into 2011, which is the election cycle. I fear that there will be less focus on governance and on administration and on policy next year, and probably more focus on the political process about who's going to be the candidates for the PDP, which is the ruling party, and all of that. So I fear that the prospects for budget execution in 2010 may be adversely affected by some of these factors.
Of course, as you've said, we may be looking at a breach of a 3% deficit target for the second year in a row, and funding is a big concern. When this came to the fore last year, the deficit was expected to be financed in part by a $500 million international bond. We saw that bond then being put on the back burner as a result of adverse market conditions. Do you see, with the global market starting to gain some momentum, this coming to the fore yet again?
Well, the jury is out. My suspicion is that if you want to have an international bond issue in 2010, I would see the groundwork actively rolling by now. All the things that were projected for financing the budget this year didn't happen. Privatization proceeds. We didn't have any significant privatization. The bond issue was deferred. I fear that we might have a recurrence of that in 2010. And therefore, the default solution would be to leave aspects of the budget unexecuted if you can raise the financing.
Well, Opeyemi Agbaje, CEO of a Resource and Trust Company, we're going to have to wait and see. Thanks so much for sharing your insight and giving us some insight into some of the expectations for this budget being announced today.